Hello, class, and welcome to week 7. This week, you only have one assignment due, and that's going to be a discussion about working with clients with disabilities. So you have your discussion due Thursday, and then your response to your peers due Sunday. This is because the majority of your talents and efforts need to be going to your final project. I'm very much looking forward to reading over your drafts and getting that feedback to you as soon as possible so that you can be working on your final project submission 1. Now, I wanted to circle back to the assignment that you all did with Miss Rose and Mr. Smith. On many of your papers, I talked about Mr. Smith feeling emasculated and probably wanting to work with a counselor that he could be vulnerable with. Now, depending on your theoretical orientation and you're learning different theories, you might have various sort of hypotheses for what Mr. Smith is going through. But on the base level, just on a human level, he is an individual who is hurting. Now, that doesn't absolve him from the words that he said, the microaggressive words that he said that could hurt Miss Rose. But as a client who's hurting, it's Miss Rose, it's her responsibility to meet him where he is and to see if they can deal with the hurt. And so he makes the comment in session that a grown white man should not have to be asking for help from her. And so, in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, I have the joke about the elephant in the room. And in many ways, this is Miss Rose, this is her opportunity to make the implicit explicit, to address the elephant in the room, to talk with Mr. Smith about what it must feel like for him to have to be working with her or to be working with her, to open the door and to process with him what's going on in his life. And so he's made a statement that could be a microaggression. Many of you sort of reacted very strongly. This class is interesting because half of you really empathize with Mr. Smith and half of you were ready to go to war for Miss Rose. And at the end of the day, as the counselor, Miss Rose should be able to work with that comment and see if the client is willing to work with her. Now, as the therapist, I always put it in the client's seat if they want to work with me, and if they don't, then let's find you someone that you can work with. I think we all recognize that in his case there are some limitations, primarily financial, but ultimately if the client doesn't feel like he or she can open up to me or that they will feel comfortable or safe with me, then I'm not going to stand in the way of anyone's work. I'm also not going to shy away from calling out something that a client says and processing it with the individual. I've had clients who've asked me if I were married, asked me about my age, asked me where I went to school. Working in the rural South, primarily Virginia and North Carolina, I've been called racial slurs by clients. And so having the presence of mind and understanding that the session isn't about me, the session is really trying to process with the client, where the statement is coming from and what's going on in their life. Understanding, too, that I have supervision and I have a personal counselor that I can sort of talk out my feelings with. But in this moment, let me meet the client where he or she is. And so that is the comment that I put on many of your papers. Mr. Smith is hurting. He feels emasculated. He feels like he cannot he cannot supply for his family. He cannot meet his family's needs. And so he wants to feel superior in some ways. He might use some of his privilege verbally. But Miss Rose, understanding that she has power in this relationship. When you are in the counseling seat, you always are in a position of power. And so understanding that she has power and understanding that, the dynamics that are at play, I think Miss Rose can use this as a wonderful opportunity to process with Mr. Smith. And so I really like this case because it kind of gets you to think about what you would do in that situation. And primarily, I think ultimately the goal is to make the implicit explicit. There's no reason for Miss Rose to be defensive with Mr. Smith, more so processing what it must be like for him. And if he really is hesitant and doesn't think he can work with her, then it's our ethical obligation to make sure he can be working with a counselor that he does feel comfortable with, that he does feel like he can work with. And so that's my just follow up on that. Your quote from the week comes from Viktor Frankl, who established logotherapy. That's a theory that you all, I don't think, learn about in your theories course, but he's an existentialist, survived several concentration camps. And when I was in my master's program, part of our training involved us going to Vienna, Austria, and I had the pleasure of meeting Viktor Viktor Frankl's widow. It was one of the peak experiences of my life. And Viktor Frankl, when he talks about meaning making and sort of finding a will to live, I think that's an appropriate quote, not only for this week, but for the class. So that's my spiel for this week. Please let me know if you have any questions about these announcements. I look forward to reading your rough drafts. Thanks.